Hey everyone, I'm John Carvello, president of Stone Oak Capital. I'm excited to have with me Jennifer Fondrevay. Jennifer is founder of Day One Ready, a consultancy firm on how to prepare for human capital challenges in M&A. She is a Fortune 500 C-suite survivor, which we will hear more about, of three multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. She's the author of the book, Now What? A Survivor's Guide to Thriving Through Mergers and Acquisitions. And she's also the managing partner or managing director at Virtas Partners. So very busy. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love to be
Yeah.
that if you make a comment on a LinkedIn post, you might get invited.
You did make a comment and you did get invited. So this is awesome. I'm super happy that you're able to join us. As we were just talking about before, I am a typical investment banker, very logical. If anybody knows kind of Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTJ. Very Spock-like almost, right? So corporate culture and human capital does not come easy to me. So I'm excited to learn during this conversation. We'll try to make it a little bit of back and forth, but truthfully, I have nothing to add on your experience. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. I want to share with everyone in the chat Jennifer's email address. So if anybody wants to connect with her, they definitely can, as I do this on the fly. Just give me a second here.
I'm impressed. And you know what's interesting, John, as you do that is the number of conversations I've had with private equity, investment bankers, even business owners to a certain extent, who will just say, "Oh, what you do makes sense. That's just not what I think about. It's not how I look at my business." And so I'm thankful that you had me on, because it is really relevant and pertinent as whether you're a business owner or an investment banker, right? How the people piece is going to contribute or not to the success of the business.
Yeah, and I think advisors that are there to quarterback probably don't think about corporate culture as much as they should. Where the entrepreneurs that are behind the deals are thinking about it all the time, right? They're thinking about, okay, this is there's these people that I'm bringing on after I do this acquisition, but the advisors aren't giving the proper kind of guidance on that. So again,
I get it, right? I've met so many lawyers who said, "Gosh, I wish I'd known about you," because lawyers can be the first line of consultation a business owner will talk to.
Yeah.
And then when they meet me, they'll say, "Oh, we've gone through so many where it could have gone better had we had someone like you." So I get it. It's not their lane. And that's why, talking to people like you, getting the word out there that human capital advisors can be equally critical as someone to get input from when you're considering a merger and acquisition.
Perfect. Yeah. Before we get into it, how about you give us, these survivor stories that you have, these three multi-billion-dollar acquisitions that you were part of. Just give us a little bit of context on that.
Sure. I think I went through three. I didn't intend to. The first one is the one I talk about the most because it had the most profound impact. I was the head of B2B marketing at Navtech, a digital mapping company. It got acquired by Nokia in 2008. And if you followed the history of where Nokia went after that, the acquisition wasn't as successful as it could have been. There were a number of variables, but I speak to that experience from what I wish that I had known as an executive, right? What happens to people when change is thrust upon them? They act differently. And if you don't have a leadership toolkit that understands the consequences of massive change, which, in my case, they were multi-billion-dollar deals, you're ill-prepared. And so I saw a gap in the market, both in the big consulting firms as well as mid-market. There weren't people out there trying to provide insight to business owners, even private equity. Here's how you need to think about the people strategy in that due diligence, beginning with culture, but then equally, the right leaders. Who are the right leaders when you're trying to navigate a workforce through change and uncertainty? So all of that I learned in the first one. And then the next two, the first I was acquired, the second I inherited a team that had been acquired. And it was really then that I thought about writing my book, because I had a number of leaders who I was working with who said, you seem to know a lot about, how to manage a team after an acquisition. And I said, because I've been them. This team, I remember being in their shoes, and it made me a much better leader as a result. And then the third acquisition experience, the company was acquired by a private equity firm, which was a whole other animal.
Yeah, another dynamic.
By then I was like, okay, I really need to write, I need to write a survivor's handbook, was what I decided.
Yeah, and your book, and I read it over the last couple of days, and it is really good. I'm actually going to put a post into the chat here. So for everybody that's on the call, go out and please buy Jennifer's book, because I think it'll be very helpful. But you talk from the perspective, or you're giving advice to the people that are part of the acquisition, people that have been acquired through the acquisition, or that are going kind of managing throughout the process. Is that right?
Right. I like to say it's the people who aren't in the room when the deal is made, but who are burdened with the execution.
Okay. That's a good way to frame it. Just to give Jennifer a feel for everybody on the call here. Why don't people hop on the chat and just say hi to Jennifer here, just to give her some love as we go through this.
Thanks for the warm embrace. I know you had a lot of people sign up, so
yeah,
clearly you want to learn about culture, but there's other people as well.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to try to make this very conversational. Again, I mentioned to you before we hopped on that I am the investment banker with a very logical mind. I like to go linear through the transaction. And then just in terms of kind of framing our conversation, maybe we can talk from the perspective of the acquirer, because I know there are a lot of M&A advisors that hop on these on our webinars and our workshops. And also a lot of acquirers, business owners that are looking to acquire. So let's talk of kind of what we'll continue to talk about here throughout in the context of, I'm an acquirer. What do I need to think of when I'm looking at acquisitions? So, just start off, maybe give us for me, like, culture is so fuzzy, right? Can you give me your definition of what culture actually is? And you have a great thing in the book that says, culture is how a company defines its business priorities, which I really liked. Like, for me, that made sense, but maybe you can explore that a little bit. Just what is actual corporate culture?
And you're not alone in having difficulty explaining it, right? Because it's, the business is the bones, but the culture is the flesh. It's the beating heart. It's how things get done in a company. So oftentimes people have difficulty defining that, but really at the end of the day, it's how things get done around the workplace. So it's a combination of your formal and informal systems, right? Both the business system, the formal business system, but then, we all know there's people do things to get work done that aren't all against the system. And it's also the values that people bring to it, right? The type of people who you hire. And so all of that combined is what creates that culture. And you and I were talking earlier, oftentimes I find with entrepreneurs, they can be so busy just creating the business, getting the product out there. And more often than not, when I've talked with entrepreneurs and worked with them, they'll say, one of the things I regret is I didn't spend enough time thinking about the culture I wanted to create in my business, right? It just became kind of their personality. It was however they operated became the culture. And they regretted that because they didn't always necessarily want it to be just their personality. And then
I do find that, sorry to cut you off there, but I do find that in the lower middle market that culture is kind of built around, the entrepreneur's personality and kind of what they embody and how they execute things. I know my one experience where, I partnered with an entrepreneur and we went out and we did a couple of acquisitions. The culture became that person's, his characteristics and his values. Like, do you find that is kind of how culture is built in the lower middle market? Is really, the owner's personality takes on kind of this greater corporate culture?
Yeah. And that can be both good and bad. And where there can be an issue, frankly, isn't a merger and acquisition, because if you've got, a culture of personality, and potentially it's, two personalities coming together, both have built a business, around their view on how to do things. And so I've done a lot of advising from that standpoint. Is, you have to think about that M&A like a marriage, right? Are you compatible? Because I think it is often helps entrepreneurs in particular frame it. Will you be okay, taking a back seat while someone else makes decisions, right? Because I've never seen co-leading work. I've never seen two people being able to run a business. Someone has to move off. And typically when I've been asked the question by entrepreneurs, how long should I stay on? I say, stay on 3 months to consult, certainly define what your payout plan is, but staying on longer, I've rarely seen an entrepreneur who's okay handing over the keys, right?
Yeah.
Because, the culture that they've built is around how they've done business.
Yeah. So just a little bit of context here. I think most of the people that in our audience are in that middle market space. So, your experience covers multi-billion-dollar acquisitions
Right.
and mergers, but also, I'm sure covers
Also
that,
mid-market.
middle market space. So do you find that, where an acquirer is a bigger company, has maybe a more well-defined kind of corporate culture, that when they're acquiring a smaller business, is there really a merger of cultures? Like, does that make sense? Or is it just like, one culture kind of eats the other culture?
Well, typically that's the scenario that plays out. One culture just kind of absorbs, it's not even an integration, it's just a taking over. I'm actually working on an article around that, just around the concept of acquisition arrogance. I experienced it myself, right? I always found it fascinating. Well, you paid billions of dollars for us, but now you treat us as though we're stupid, because we haven't done the business how you think we should, but yet you valued us pretty significantly at one point. And that can be an issue in the middle market as well. And so what I'm advising traditionally those business owners is, you need to create an atmosphere where you can actually co-create new best practices, right? Truly allow this company you've acquired to contribute to the culture, as opposed to just taking it over, absorbing it, because that's how you retain the value of the company you've acquired. If they feel like they don't have a voice, they can't contribute, you oftentimes, and frankly, we're seeing a lot of it now, is you'll lose key talent, but because they'll feel like, well, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't the kind of culture I want to be a part of. So I'm glad you asked that point, because that's really a lot of the work I've been doing recently is around that aspect of culture, right? Don't just overwhelm them, but truly demonstrate an interest in having them contribute to your culture.
Yeah, and I loved how you kind of weave that out through the book, where trying to, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in our conversation here, but how you can pick out the kind of the best of both cultures and try to, bring them together, right?
Yeah.
Was an important piece of, just doing the deal and having a successful deal. So
Yeah. And it's I always use the marriage analogy, because I feel, John, and I'd love your opinion on this, but I feel like a light bulb goes off. People start to go, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. Right. You want to, before the honeymoon period, you're in love, but you need to spend time really getting to know this potential partner. And I say, the marriages I most admire are the ones where love is certainly there, but what grounds the partnership is respect, right? Coming to that partnership with respect for the other side, seeing what they can contribute, what you can contribute, and really then working together to make it a better union. And I can't tell you how many times, and similar to you, right? The makeup of business owners, CEOs, they're not thinking about the feelings part of it. But when I frame it in that regard from a marriage standpoint, I can always see that there's a clear understanding of, yeah, that's how I want to look at a future potential acquisition.
Yeah, and I guess taking the marriage analogy a little bit further, like I mean, maybe people can even do better in terms of picking their mates too, right? So that's what I want to think. I want to kind of start with is how do we look at this holistically? Like, you just don't kind of fall in love and not be kind of critical about how these businesses can come together and how these relationships and marriages, so to speak, can come together. So
Right.
just before I do that, I want to drop in the chat box a link to your book again.
Thank
I want
you.
everybody on the call to go out and buy the book because it's really good. Um,
Thank you.
yeah.
I'll see a spike today. I'll talk to you later about what that commission looks like.
Perfect. So, again, my logical brain, I'd really love to start at kind of the beginning on the acquisition side. So we're an acquirer and we're thinking about, starting this process of going out and acquiring other businesses. So when we're putting together the strategy, when I'm helping my clients, it's mostly about, okay, what size of targets are we looking for? What's the geography? Why do we want to do these acquisitions? Like, do we want to expand our product or service lines? But rarely are we talking about, what corporate culture would be a fit for the ones that we're, acquiring, or even, further up, like what's our corporate culture, right?
Right.
And what other corporate cultures would be kind of a good marriage for us. So how do you set that conversation at kind of the onset of developing the strategy of going out and doing acquisitions?
Well, I'm glad you raised that point, like where in the journey, because where I have found the issues tend to happen is that looking at culture doesn't tend to happen in the due diligence, not as systematically as it should, right? That's why I think I made the comment on your LinkedIn post, right? That's why you really need a human capital advisor in addition to your lawyer and accountant and your investment banker advisor, because the sooner you have that insight in that due diligence period, how, what are their values, how will we work together. A lot of the work I've been asked to do just recently, because I do feel like this is thankfully catching on, the sooner we have an insight on the other company, the better, is doing that assessment, whether it's a very brief survey for people to list out, right? What's your decision-making process? How do you communicate? What are the spending habits of your company, right? Using a systematic overview of the way that they operate. And then I do one-on-ones to help really understand how people get work done, right? Are they centralized? Is all decisions made at the top? Are people empowered? Because each of those variables can affect how are we going to work together afterwards.
Yeah.
And it can vary, right? Oftentimes people say, well, you can't have those conversations, right? When you're doing due diligence. I have found when I'm working with forward-thinking business owners, you find a way to get the information you need early on, and then once you're really like you've got the letter of intent, the last 5 projects I've done, the deal is pretty much done and signed, and I'm working with executives to help them define what's this new culture going to be,
Yeah.
particularly in the middle market. What do we want to bring to this union? What are the things that we do well? What are the things you do well? I had a session yesterday that was wonderfully enlightening because both sides shared the things that they liked about the company that they were part of, but also the dirty laundry, right? Here are things that we're hoping you can help us complement. And I'm confident their partnership is going to be successful as a result of that.
So you talked about it at a due diligence stage, but could we even do it earlier? Is there an opportunity to do it earlier? Do you see people thinking about it like, okay, I want to start the acquisition, but I want a business that has maybe a culture of marketing, right? That can complement our culture of sales. Like, so are people even that proactive, or no, you don't see that as being kind of the right place to start having that conversation?
I do. Where I've seen it be effective, John, is when the company itself is very clear on its culture,
Okay.
right? The business owner, the leadership team, you ask anyone and they're very clear. Here's how we work, right? Here's our decision making. Here's how our work habits, the values that we have as a company, the clearer you are on who you are as a company and what your why is, that's when I've seen, as they have conversations, because as you highlight, right, before the due diligence, you can have people who are having conversations for years, right? They're kind of getting to know another company and they're in the back of their mind thinking, maybe this could work out. The only issue I see there is if it's only, one business owner who's only talked to the other business owner, if the conversation's only been at that level, that's not necessarily going to give you insight on, well, what's the, I know John, he works at he's the head of company A, but that doesn't necessarily always give you an insight. Yes, but how does John run his business?
Yeah.
Right? How does he treat his employees? How do the employees feel about him? So I've seen a little bit sometimes where people think, well, I know that other company, but they base it purely on knowing only the other owner. And that's not going to give you the true insight.
Yeah, I love that advice that you have, is you kind of have to know yourself before you can kind of really be able to go and say, like, this corporate culture would be a great fit. Like, it needs to be kind of self-reflection almost before you can kind of frame that within your own strategy when you're going out at the onset. So that's great.
Again,
Well,
same
one
with
thing,
marriage, like I'm trying to always give people analogies. Here's how to think about it, right? In marriage, you got to know yourself to pick the right partner.
I'm going to qualify. We are not marriage counselors here, especially me. So,
Understood.
Yeah. You talked about, and I can't remember if this was on another kind of conversation you had or if it was in your book, but you talked about a pre-mortem.
Yeah.
I kind of liked that idea and that just phrasing. Can you just kind of explain what a pre-mortem would be?
You bet. Are you military? Do you have military background at all? Because it's always when I've had conversations in the chat or someone will say from the military, absolutely, pre-mortems are great, right? I love this idea because essentially, so it's Gary Klein, who really is the originator of the concept of a pre-mortem. So if we know post-mortem, at least that definition, your patient is dead, unfortunately, and you go back and try and figure out as a doctor with the team what happened, right? What were all the steps that were taken? A pre-mortem in a business context is, okay, let's act as though deal's done, decision's been made. Now, what are all the ways this could go wrong, right? And for me, it's a preemptive strike. It's a military drill. I think the military leaders who have approached me and said they loved it is because they understand you do drill after drill after drill to be prepared for every scenario, when you ultimately have to go to war. And so a pre-mortem in the business context it's scenario planning. Okay, let's say the government comes out with a policy that could affect a product launch. Your competition moves faster on a product than you anticipated, or they come out with a product that you hadn't even known, or a new competitor comes into the market you hadn't anticipated. How's that going to affect the deal? Would you still pursue it, right? Or not would you still pursue it, but what do you need to do to adjust? Talent. If you were to lose key talent, what would be the impact of that on the deal? And those are just like the top ones, because those tend to be the things you don't anticipate. Oftentimes you can decide on the deal almost in a vacuum because you're basing it on numbers. And even though you may have calculated, valuations out for a certain number of years, it's still based on the information now. So the more you think about, okay, well, what are the things that could impact this? How do we prepare and plan for that?
Yeah, that's great. And I think maybe that's one of the things that you can kind of bring into the strategy piece, right? Is just playing through some of these scenario plannings and kind of playing out game playing almost to see what could happen. What if we did find a business that was like this? Would that be a fit for us? So I like that a lot in terms of a little practical piece of advice that our listeners can take away on. Just to our audience, if you guys have questions, please add them in the Q&A box or the chat box if you want. I'll do my best to try to manage those. So let's kind of move on to kind of sourcing and acquisition targets. So during the sourcing of acquisition targets, there are ways for acquirers to assess. Are there ways for acquirers to assess from a distance, like a corporate culture? So you're just you're putting together your potential target list. Like, are there things on a company's website that might be a red flag to say, like, this immediately is not going to be a fit from a cultural perspective? Or, like you said, like, I get a feel for that business. I've kind of known of them in the marketplace, but is there anything you could do at that stage to just avoid disasters, that are
Yeah.
potentially at the closing?
Well, and I'm going to say this as a former marketing executive, you absolutely cannot understand another company's culture by its website, by its marketing materials, by its press release, right? Because those are the well established, the boilerplate, how we talk about ourselves. I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings recently where we talked about what's your vision, and the business owner will say, well, it's not those words about us on the website, right? Because it tends to be at a 30,000-foot level, right? You're not going to really get to know, again, how do people operate it? How do they make decisions? So I would say it's difficult to really get to know a company from afar. Even if somebody asked me this once, well, how about, you've met them at trade shows. Again, they're putting on a certain vision of the company and what they're like. I mean, they're there to sell. They're there to get you to buy. But to really understand how a company operates, how the leadership makes decisions, how they work with one another. And that's why I always encourage, when you can, don't just keep it at the leadership level, but how do the frontline leaders really get the work done? Because in those conversations, your leadership, they're leaders now for a reason. They don't always have their hands in the actual day-to-day operations. And that's where I've seen too often, particularly in the middle market, where there are surprises. Oh, I had no idea that's how you really get the business done. This is a longer time frame. Or, again, the variety of surprises can be endless. So the more that you can get that next level down, those people closer to the work, to really help you understand how work gets done, it just gives you a more informed view on that company. But definitely not from the website.
Okay, that's great. I didn't know how you were going to answer that, and I wasn't expecting. I thought there might be some things that you could see as, like, kind of red flags in terms of kind of that initial assessment. But it's nice to get that perspective, that it's probably pretty hard to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there are a lot of surveys, and I don't know all of them. I have just found a written survey, because now we want so much data, right? I find surveys can provide guidance, but you really need to observe to evaluate, right? You need to have interactions with people, because survey will only give you how people answer that on that particular question. The better opportunity to really get to know a company and its culture is to observe it up close.
Yeah, and that actually, we're going off script here a bit, but there is a question here talking about employee engagement and surveys. Like, would you use that as part of, like, the due diligence or the assessment of a corporate culture within a potential acquisition?
Yeah, particularly, I mean, employee engagement. If a company's doing employee engagement, then you're usually in the multi-billion-dollar corporate level, right? Not to say that middle market don't do those levels of surveys, but they can get expensive. So if you have access to that information, absolutely. It can be tremendously relevant. And ideally, right, you're looking at a company that has a high employee engagement.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. And then in terms of just like, if we're moving on to just valuation and, kind of the offer stage, like, so much of a transaction from a investor's perspective, or even kind of an advisor's perspective, is a return on the investment, right? But that return on investment in many cases is driven by, the synergies that can be achieved, and those synergies that can be achieved are based on the abilities company to execute, which is, dependent on the people within the business, right? So how do you take all of that into account? Like, to say, we're putting out, an X, $1 million valuation on a business. And it has some of these assumptions on the synergies that we can achieve. How do you kind of put some reliance on the ability to execute on those synergies, given kind of the corporate culture mix and some of the things that can go wrong? That's a very convoluted question, and I apologize for that.
But you're in by nature of the question, right? It really can vary, right? Because there are some integrations that are fine, right? Because you're crystal clear, right? We're just going after the product. I say you need to be as transparent about that up front, right? Because there the issue can be, if you haven't been transparent, you're only going after the product, then there's a lot of churn with the employees not knowing, they're thinking they're going to be a part of it. So now you're dealing with a lot of change and disruption. So the clearer you are on here's what we're acquiring, right? So it's either the product or the talent. Again, being crystal clear on what you're going after. But in that acquisition integration, where I have found the struggles begin, and I talk about that in the book a bit, is if the valuation's way too high, right? And you're expecting to hit a certain amount by X date, that doesn't accommodate for people's need to adjust and get from denial to acceptance, right? I talk about that in the book. So if you haven't factored in that time frame, and you've got a valuation you have to hit by a certain date, traditionally it doesn't go well because you haven't acknowledged, okay, we're announcing on day one, but we've got people, and depending on the size of the company, potentially a large workforce that needs to adjust and pivot and start hitting and executing on the strategy. So to me, oftentimes the issue is the valuation's too high. The company that's acquiring doesn't have a clear understanding of what its strengths are, who it is as a company, and all of that can negatively impact your ability to hit the valuation by year one. So to me, that's why so much of the focus on how do people react to change? What are the consequences of this? How do we factor that in when we're assigning a valuation to this company? Because we've got to be able to hit it within the time frame that we've agreed to.
Yeah, I love that idea where it's like, okay, so you have the valuation, but there's this big piece of the valuation that's kind of contingent on achieving a whole bunch of synergies. How aggressive are those synergies, right? What are some of the challenges that we might encounter to achieving those synergies? So really kind of putting a people plan around that. And maybe also setting the expectation and setting the communication for the expectation of when those synergies are going to be achieved. I think that's awesome, and I haven't heard anybody kind of frame it like that. And truthfully, I haven't seen anybody do that, right? Where it's now it's just the number. It's like there's a whole bunch of spreadsheets and financial models flying around. And it's all kind of like on a hope and a prayer, but you don't really think about what needs to go into that from a people perspective to execute. So that is pretty enlightening for me. I appreciate that.
Oh, I'm always happy to. I've offered an epiphany moment, and that's my goal with all of these, right? If there's one nugget, you take away, and that's why I'm actually thrilled to be talking to you. And the more I'm able to talk, whether it's webinars or podcasts, to think about sooner in the process, right? My company, I work with Virtas Partners managing director for that, to the human capital services, because they've seen the benefit of how do we think about what that people strategy looks like in due diligence, so the people are ready day one, right? And that's what we're always striving towards. We want to help that company succeed. So the more that we work through upfront on that people strategy, whether it's the culture assessment, whether it's, okay, what are the efficiencies going to be? How do we set people up for success? If you've got a plan day one, when you make that announcement, it gives your workforce a greater opportunity to be contributing to that strategy sooner.
Yeah, perfect. How many people on the call here are finding value in this conversation? Just put it in the chat box. Awesome.
Lovely to see.
Perfect. Hey, let's move on to kind of due diligence, and I think this is going to be an area that is maybe where we can, we can understand what you do for your clients, which I think will provide a lot of value to the people on the call. And before we do that, you talked about, getting a sense for a company's culture during due diligence. But the one thing that happens, as you know, through these merger and acquisition processes is that everybody's very guarded, right? Everybody, there's, the need for confidentiality. You don't get full access to maybe all of the corporate documentation. You definitely don't get full access to the customers. You don't get full access to the employee base. How do you, cut through, excuse me for the bad language, but cut through the bullshit of, what you're being fed through from investment bankers like me, and through kind of the management team versus what's real in the corporation?
Well, and it's why, honestly, John, I'm really encouraged by the projects I've been doing most recently, because in each case, I've been working with the leadership from both companies, right before the deal is announced. And we've been doing day-long discussions, right? Everything from, the culture aspect to the pre-mortem to how to prepare as leaders as the organization goes through, as I say, the stages of grief. But what I have found transformative, and what the leadership on both sides have continued to say, is the day helps them get a sense of each other. And I've even had leaders say, I actually have a better understanding of how our team works together, because exactly as you said, right? If you stay guarded, which is understandable, right? Business is about, projecting confidence, here's how we do our business. But I create intentionally a conversation that allows people to open up. I think it's because I've been there. I know what it's like to be a leader who's trying to figure out, like, is this going to work? I really want this to work, but I don't know. But the faster you can get a sense of, well, how do they operate? How do they make decisions? How do they lead their teams? How do they reward their employees? How do they empower them? All of that, the faster you get a sense for that, it just sets you up for success. And the last several projects I've done in the past month, every time by the end of the day, the leadership have said, I know we're capable now of doing what we've set out to, because I now better understand how this executive team is going to work together.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So let's get specific into, how you help your clients. And I think this would be great, because now people will know how maybe they can work with you through transactions, but also, people will understand what they would need to do to get up to speed with like corporate culture and making sure that they're successful post acquisition. So number one, you talked about like a checklist, and I mean, we won't get into what your proprietary method is, but what would that checklist kind of cover off? You kind of mentioned a few of those points.
So typically what I try to do, if I'm have the benefit of being part of that due diligence, right? That's where I'll do a culture assessment. So I'll do a survey where, again, you try and work with leadership on both sides so that the survey can go to, to designated key people, right? So you get a view from how they do their work. And again, I won't go into the details, but it's an assessment, a very brief one, but gives you a very good window in. And then I do one-on-one interviews with each, key stakeholder from both sides of the company. And then through that, right, again, through the work that I've done, the research that I've done, I'm able to determine what are your culture commonalities and what are your differences? And are the differences things that could be blockers? Because oftentimes differences doesn't mean, I keep going back to marriages. Again, we're not marriage counselors, I know, but you can have people who complement each other. So I think differences don't necessarily mean red flags. I can see now, are these differences either because how you think about a customer and how they should be served is different than how you think about it? Like if that's night and day, that can be an issue. But I'll say, What this means though, is then you need to come to alignment and give yourself time to come to alignment in terms of what does that customer engagement look like, right? Particularly because where I've seen issues happen, I'll just use a random example, right? A light bulb company that has sold high-end light bulbs acquires a light bulb company that has sold low-end light bulbs, right? And they think this is going to be a great merger or acquisition because now we have a portfolio of product to sell. But if your sales team that has been selling high-end light bulbs has been spending the last 10 years, saying those lower end light bulbs, you don't want those, you only want ours, but now I've got to sell a portfolio of light bulbs and I've now got to convince my customer to think differently about, the products that we have. If you haven't factored in, well, how are we going to accommodate now what that customer engagement looks like? That can be a significant obstacle to overcome. So I'm trying to identify where do I see the potentially you're going to have issues, things that could inhibit your ability to sell your product, and are they overcomable, and can you afford the time to get there? That's what I really try and do as soon as possible. And then after that, I'm always about, getting in, helping the leadership think about their mindset and approach, and then moving on, right? This isn't to consult for years. It's really to help set them up for success. So the other aspect is post due diligence, once the deal's been announced, helping the business unit leaders understand how to lead their teams through the change.
Yeah. Just staying on the due diligence side of things, what are the potential outcomes from your assessment? Like, I guess there could be, is there ever retrading where you go back and say, what we thought was kind of available on the synergies and the valuation just isn't there because of the corporate culture kind of clashes or differences? Is it potentially the deal just falls apart, or is it kind of a reworking of, kind of the integration plan go forward? What do you see as most common kind of result, or, probably it all depends?
Actually, well, it's because I'm only now starting to get included in due diligence. I don't have that line of sight, but what I can tell you is, despite my wanting to be there, more often than not, we'll advise a client, you really should do this in due diligence. No, we've got it. Then things don't work, right? It doesn't go well. Hey, can you come back and help us fix this, right? And that's when I'll do, okay, I'll do the assessment that I would have tried to do earlier. I'll do it later, and then say, okay, but let's identify, here's where your top 3 challenges are. And then I work with the team. How are we going to overcome these? And I'm intentionally saying it's the whole team has to come to this and work it together. So more often than not, I get called in after the train wreck has happened. And, it's human nature, right?
Yeah.
When people think, no, we're all smart. We've got this. We'll figure it out. Great business opportunity. Everyone's equally motivated, but you can't always anticipate how people react to change, and what can happen when people are just trying to urgently execute. That's when the issues arise. So that's where I'm usually brought in, is to help when things haven't gone right.
Okay, interesting. So you are kind of an M&A reviver.
Yes. Yeah. Because I gave up a very, very good corporate career. I had worked really hard to become a chief marketing officer, but after going through 3 multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, I thought there's got to be a better way to do M&A, where the people piece of mergers and acquisitions is thought about sooner in the process to set the M&A up for success. Because so many of these deals, could be great. The companies need each other, right? Their growth strategy, it's a great opportunity. So I want to lower the 70-90% failure rate that, continues to be thrown out there, whether it's Harvard Business Review or McKinsey. I want to lower that failure rate. And thankfully, I feel like I've had so many clients I've had the opportunity to work with. I think there's possibilities, John. I do think we can give M&A a better chance for success.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm learning something through our very short conversation here. So, definitely reconsidering how I can bring, experts like you into the processes that I run. Just a quick question on due diligence. So with an acquirer, are they advising or hiring you in kind of a, you come in as the expert, or do you actually work with their team? Like, is there who on their team should work closely with you to make sure that the corporate culture piece of it is properly identified, properly like understood through the M&A process?
So the best scenarios are when I've had a chance, and this is how I got the nicknames M&A Whisperer, right? So I've had a chance to work with CEOs. I give them perspective. Here's how you need to think about it. Absolutely. You've talked to your lawyer, you've got your investment banker advisor, like you've had that part. Now let's talk about the people part. And then I work with their direct leadership to, again, prepare them for essentially the post-transaction integration challenges that they can expect, the common issues. We've talked about them here, the stages of grief, the personalities, how people react to change. And then after that, I work with the next level down, meaning the deal's been announced. Now you've got your frontline leaders who oftentimes are doing two jobs at once, right? Both leaders and frontline. You've got the integration you're working on plus your day-to-day. So I'm working to give them guidance and support to help them navigate, because it's a different toolkit. As leaders, we're often, this is the strategy, now we go and execute. But when you're doing an integration and there's so much uncertainty as you're figuring things out as you go along, it's a different toolkit that you need to pull from as a leader. So I'm there to provide you my expertise and insight to help those leaders navigate that time.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. That's really good kind of, again, understanding how you work with your clients. I'm going to put your book again in the chat box. I know everybody has already bought one, but just in case there's maybe someone that hasn't, please go and get.
Thank you. So gracious of you, John. And really, thank you again for inviting me. I'm thrilled that you positively reacted to my LinkedIn post on your previous episode with all the advisors, because I thought that was it was a great discussion that you had.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the reason that I'm super grateful for the platform that I have is because I get to talk to smart people like you and help me, maybe become a better M&A deal maker. So I'm super appreciative of that. Listen, we have about 13 minutes left. If anybody has questions, add them in the chat. I do want to talk about post-acquisition, and you mentioned this, and this was an awesome part of your book, was just the characters that come out after the acquisition. And again, we can't get into all the characters. So everybody that's bought the book, please go in and read that, because I think it's important to an acquirer to identify, how people might change, or some of the characteristics that might come out in people post-acquisition, and how to manage those, to really stop potential sabotage of deals. So, maybe name 3 of the characters that you see most common that emerge post-acquisition, and how you can kind of work with those characters
Right.
to kind of stop any sort of derailment, or to work closely with the ones that are heroes and that can actually help create and build a stronger culture.
Yeah. So the three I tend to get asked about the most, it's not that they're necessarily the most common, but they can be the most detrimental.
Okay.
So the first is the former rock star. And as you noted, these are all caricatures in my book. I wanted to bring the personalities to life. And the illustrator, Jeff York, amazing talent, brought each of my characters to life. So the former rock star can be in a company, can be the person who has the Midas touch, right? Everything they touch turns to gold. Head of sales, your product innovator, the chief technology officer, the head of marketing, depending on the orientation of the company, but it's that person that just has the ear of the CEO and it could be actually not just at the top, right? Could be someone who's on the fast track, who's identified as a rock star. What happens is when the metrics for success change, which inevitably they do post-deal, right? You're bringing these two companies together for a reason. Your strategy is shifting. So the metrics for success change. And a rock star who has built a reputation on getting there by doing things a certain way can often have a very difficult time pivoting. They either resist, right? And Marshall Goldsmith wrote a great book about this, right? What got you here won't get you there. And they kind of almost plateau because they're thinking, well, wait a minute, I made this company, I contributed to its best practices. Yeah, but now you're changing. And if they can't pivot, they can be toxic, frankly. And so in the book, I go into one, here's how to identify them. I say always the best physical description is that, it's the person who sits in the back of the room is just waiting to say, I told you so. This is never going to work. Mm-hmm. But they can be. And so I advise, for those people, acknowledge the past, acknowledge what they contributed to the past, and highlight, but your skills, here's how you can contribute to the future. But, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. And so with a former rock star, role model the behavior you wish to see, right? Acknowledge what they did before, but paint a picture of, hey, here's how you got to contribute to the future. And with that personality type in particular, I always say, talk to people from the outside, right? Tap into your trusted advisors. Ideally, you have them. Traditionally, if someone's been a top performer, they have people they go to, because oftentimes those advisors from the outside can say, listen, you've got to pivot, right? You were phenomenal before, but now your company's changed. The metrics have changed, and you can still be a key contributor, but you've got to adjust. So that personality in particular, every time I show my 10 personalities, someone in the audience will say, oh, we've had one of those.
Yeah, I've seen the former rock star. Hey, when we were doing acquisitions, a lot of times, and this is maybe a little crude to say, but there was addition by subtraction, where people just didn't fit with the new culture that you wanted to build.
Right.
How do you deal with that? Is it better to rip the Band-Aid off and just get again, not sounding too cruel, but just kind of get rid of those people and move on with building the new culture? Or, is there a better way to manage that?
Well, and I'll just use the former rock star, because actually in the last several projects I've done, we've talked in depth about those personalities, right? And after a certain period, if that person isn't pivoting, you've got to, as you said, right, you rip the Band-Aid off. It's not going to be a fit. And if you let them stay on too long, they become toxic, and they undermine any success you're having in moving things forward, because you have fence sitters. People are like, I don't know if this deal is going to work or not. Should I contribute? They wait to see what happens. I call them the missing in action. They're just, looking to see how things are going to play out. And so with a former rock star, you've got to be crystal clear. Here's the time frame. I really think you could be an amazing contributor, but we're moving forward and you have an opportunity to contribute. And if you don't see that happening, you've got to cut bait quickly, because it's not going to help you in the long term. And it just, on another personality, the dominatrix, the bully, that's the personality who rules through fear. They are very seductive to private equity boards, because they get results. It's not, I don't care how you feel. These are the objectives. This is what we're going after. But when you rule through fear, you don't get the best work out of people. So you'll lose talent along the way, right? There will be initially people who just want to keep their job because they're worried, but over time, operating under fear, people don't produce their best work and will leave. So that personality in particular, I always say, they can be seductive, but you've got to be very clear on how that personality operates, and is that really the way you want to run your business long term. So that those I think it's just worth highlighting those two, because you bring up an excellent point. Not everyone fits, not everyone works, and the sooner you're clear on that and the role that a person can play in the organization, You just have better line of sight on, okay, here's how things are going to work, and here will be potentially the challenges that we have.
Yeah, again, I mean, in the book, you were speaking to, the people within, where they were trying to kind of self-assess who they might be. But for me, it gave me a really great perspective on, you provided a framework for the type of people that might emerge, and
Yeah.
identifying them, and then also giving like a real action plan on how to deal with them. And like you said, in some cases, it might be best to kind of part ways. But in a lot of cases, there's ways to manage that relationship, and to fix that relationship. Or there's people that kind of emerge as, I think you had one of the characters as a hero, right? Somebody that emerges.
Right. A great unifier.
Yeah. So, it's awesome to now have this framework. And again, I've mentioned it lots of times, but people should get this, because this is going to help us all do acquisitions a lot more efficiently and effectively with this framework that you provided. So anybody have questions, just add them in. We got 5 minutes left. I do have one question here, and it's probably from a fellow investment banker, because they are talking about analytics and metrics that we can rely on to understand culture. Are there anything that you might have talked about, kind of employee engagement, but what kind of metrics do you see that provide a really good assessment or understanding of corporate culture, if any?
Well, I use my own proprietary one with Virtas Partners. I've seen, predictive intelligence, where they're trying to understand how does someone think, how do they operate, right? Will they be a good fit for our company or not? So there's more assessments that are coming out. So I don't want to promote one over another, but what I always highlight is, with those assessments, it's guidance. It's not the definitive. It's data. It's another data point, but without having that one-on-one, that actual interaction, that ability to assess. And I know, right, for people who really like data and want to be able to rely solely on that, I counter that and say it's one data point. For a future partner, I'll keep going back to my marriage analogy. For a future partner, I wouldn't have them just fill out a questionnaire and say, absolutely, you are the one, right? Because they're going to fill it out a certain way.
Wouldn't that be so much easier though?
It would, but it's like I say, speed dating, right? That's what I worry about now with the record number of deals that are happening. We're doing them so quickly, and I understand that the opportunity is there, but it's kind of like speed dating. You're really not going to find the right partner through speed dating. So nor would you, marry someone just based on how they filled out the questionnaire. So there's a lot more assessments. I'm happy to in a follow-up say, here are the top 5 that I would consider, but I don't want to promote hey, this is just do the assessment and you're fine. You really need to have that counterbalance, the interpretation of it, and that one-on-one interaction.
Awesome. We got 2 more minutes here. Maybe we'll just close it out. Like, what are the top 3? And this is going to be a real unfair question, but let's say the top 3 things you need to consider in corporate, like just assessing corporate culture, integrating corporate culture into like kind of the M&A side of things.
I usually boil it down to one, right? Do you, in your engagement, even, and I would say you have to be intentional coming to it, but do you respect that other company? Do you, because most profoundly, that's what CEOs always come back to me and say, I wish I'd had respect for the other side. I wish I had demonstrated that. I wish we had both come to that and understanding and having that, right? And when I say respect, it's not just, hey, you're good at your job, but truly respect for the value that they bring. When you have that, and then the ability to treat others as you would wish to be treated, it's the golden rule. And it applies in M&A. Think about, okay, if this was happening to me, how would I want to be treated, particularly as acquirer? And then speak truthfully, and that can get, pushback, but I say you can be transparent. You can think about, here's what I know and here's what I don't know, but here's what is being worked on. Here's what is being developed. Contribute to that. Help me solve this challenge. So the more you are truly inviting people to contribute and respecting the role that they play, that to me is what sets up your deal for success.
Yeah, I love that. I try to share that a similar message. I always tell my clients, like, do you trust the other side? It doesn't matter how many, how tight your legal agreements. If there's no trust, let's not do the deal, because as much as you try to document it and mitigate the risk, if there's just no trust, there's no point in moving forward.
Right. It's like, don't get married knowing there's flaws and say, well, we'll work on it after. It'll get better. I think those issues will go away. They don't.
Yeah. Trust and respect. I mean, kind of full circle back to our marriage analogy here. So, hey, Jennifer, I am super appreciative that you took me up on my offer to jump on. To everybody that joined us, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Everybody go and get the book. I know you already have, so I don't need to tell you again. Yeah, maybe we can do this again, Jennifer. Really appreciate it.
Would love to. Again, thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Have an awesome day.